everybody, this is Gulf Harbour Radio, ZMH 286 from a really miserable day here. It is reminding us that it's not yet spring. It is August, and this is a traditional August day from my memory in Wellington. It is 100% grey clouds. It is now raining. It wasn't a while ago. We have 13 degrees because the wind is from the north. Thank you very much for the warm-up weather. It was only 4 knots I reported before, but it certainly looks more now, about 10 knots. And it's 995.3 steady. So, yeah, just a very unpleasant day here at Gulf Harbour, and unfortunately we have to drive into the city for something. So, yeah, not a very wonderful day here. And I can see that it's not very wonderful between New Cal and Fiji and up down the Vanuatu chain, but everywhere else looks rather good at the moment. Samoa is the place to be. Boy, it looks lovely there in the southern islands of Fiji. So enjoy it while you've got it. We'll just have to find our coats. All right, I'll just pause to see if there is anything anybody wants that's urgent. Please speak up, and don't forget, folks, that we will move to 8297 if there is a problem, but it sounds like that today is pretty good. Just a reminder, looking at I know a lot of you bring up the Met Service analysis when David does his weather so that you can follow through with it. You'll notice today that there are quite a few troughs and fronts, and what he's going to do after he's gone through the weather for the islands, he will go into detail about the difference between troughs and fronts. We heard on the email that the word trough is not used very much in Northern Europe, so he will go through the difference between the two, particularly as New Zealand Met Service differentiates between them, and you can see why after he has talked. All right, and on that topic, if you do want a little bit more detail on the different terminology that's used for weather, if you go to our website, ghradio.co.nz, and click on weather, now there's 3 major topics, click on the weather, there is a paper, it's quite a lengthy one, called Weather for the Yachtsman, Weather for the Yachtsman, and in that paper, all of the terms that David uses, in fact any meteorologist uses, are defined with specific reference to South Pacific weather. So have a look at that and it will give you a bit more detail. All right, let's move on to the news. Imran Khan, who many Brits and Kiwis and Aussies will know from their cricket days, he is now the Prime Minister of Pakistan, his new position. And he has got a big job ahead of him. He is going to tackle the rather major economic problem because there is now a major divide between the rich and the poor in Pakistan. Well, there always was, but it's getting bigger. And the other problem is rather endemic corruption. So he's got a big job ahead of him.
I hope he's not underhanded.
David hopes he's not underhanded. Oh, that was a bit low. Anyway, he actually looks quite different. I saw him when I was at the gym yesterday. We've got new machines and we get Al Jazeera now, so they had him on, and he has certainly aged since his cricketing days, as you would expect. A bit of interest from Gracious Lady. They were going to stop at Chesterfield on their way from Fiji to Oz. Is it Fiji to Oz? Or no, Port Vila to Oz. And they can't get a permit. Well, it's a long, lengthy process to stop at Chesterfield, which is interesting. It used to be that, oh, well, that's if you were in New Caledonia, you could do that. But I guess it's a little bit more difficult when you're not in New Caledonia. So just bear in mind that that is a difficult process now. So we'll hear a bit more about that, hopefully, from people that want to do that from a different source. There's been quite a bit in the newspaper in Korea. They allowed the North Korean, this was when the North and South got together, they decided that they would allow 90 families from South Korea to go to North Korea to unite with people that had been split up 6 decades ago. Well, 57,000 families applied to do that, so they chose 90, and there's some pictures in the paper. Boy, these folk can live a long life. Must be what they eat, but there were pictures of a lady over 90 in North Korea meeting up with her son, whom she hadn't seen since a baby, and he was in his 70s. So, boy, just as well they did live a long time, because it's taken a very long time to get together. Major problems in Venezuela. They have got incredible problems with their bolivar. I think their currency is. There's an absolute mass exodus from Venezuela to the neighbouring countries, and there's a lot of problems with the migrant camps that have been set up, being attacked by the locals who actually don't want so many Venezuelans in their country. Since the start of the year, 500,000 Venezuelans are now in Ecuador via Colombia, and about 10,000 a week are pouring out. So it's a major problem in South America, and I know some of you who have come from Venezuela will probably have had a bit of a feel for it. They have just removed, the government has just removed 5 zeros from their currency. So their bolivar has dropped 90%. So you can imagine it's actually quite difficult to get anything done in Venezuela at the moment with that currency problem. Closer to home, there's been a couple of interesting weather phenomena. A tornado in New Plymouth. They get that from time to time there. I don't know what it is about the lay of the land and the mountain and the sea and so on, but every now and again there is a tornado in New Plymouth, caused a bit of a problem. And then there is a fantastic picture of a twister that came off the sea in Ohope, which is in the Bay of Plenty, or Coromandel. No, I suppose it's Bay of Plenty. Bay of Plenty, yes, definitely Bay of Plenty. Absolutely fantastic picture of a huge twister that came in off the sea. A water spout, says David. And a bit of a disappointment for me, another Chinese dairy factory has opened in New Zealand. It's a skim milk powder, whole milk powder plant in Gore. It's just tough when you've spent most of your life in an industry to see it being taken over by another country, but that's the way it's going here in New Zealand and in many other places of the world with the Chinese money that's pouring in. All right, not too much to report from your reports in. I see, well, those of you who know Bright Angel, they are closing in on being home, so that's pretty exciting for them. Mr. Troy are reporting really nice conditions up there. Where are they? They're in Matangi, and Villamere patiently waiting for this front to clear. It looks like it has before they set, well, it hasn't cleared from them, but it is moving rather fast, so they'll be quite happy to get going for a new spot. So good morning everybody, and is there any reports from anywhere? Please call. I wonder if there's anybody out there. If there's somebody in Tonga, I would be interested in a signal report. Looks like pretty beautiful weather in Tonga. Could I have a signal report, please? Nobody in Tonga. Well, that will shorten the report a bit, so that's good. And we know that we're getting out to Fiji, so that's good as well. Anybody in Vanuatu or New Caledonia?
This is Code Blue. It's Gigi.
Well, we've got Gracious Lady. Good morning, Hillary. Got you. So you'll be interested to know what it's like, because I think you're planning to leave tomorrow. Won't be very nice at the moment. You'll be pleased to be sitting. Hopefully you've stocked up on what you want. And Code Blue. Good morning, Judy. Go ahead.
I just want to tell you, copy us. We hear you clearly in Suva.
Wow, that's good, because you are booming in today. So I take back all I've said about the miserable propagation conditions. Fantastic copy from you, Judy. Could be right next door. So that's excellent. All right, but we don't have anyone in Tonga. Anybody in Tonga? Over.
This is Coach Wilkins. I did hear somebody before.
Oh, thanks, Judy. Oh, well, at least we know someone's there, so we better take that line away and cover Tonga as well. All right, so we're not getting out too well in Tonga. Well, not getting anybody from Tonga, but hopefully our extra strength here, which is about 350, 450 watts, will get to you in Tonga. All right, well, if that's it, we've got quite a bit to cover with David's weather today because he is going to go through that clarification of fronts and troughs. So I got it online in bed last night, so I'm pretty much an expert now too. Well, not really. What I was interested in is how they actually differentiate the two when they do their maps, but that might be a bit too much detail to go into this morning, but it was quite interesting. All right, I'm going to pass the microphone. Here's David.
And then she went promptly asleep. I think before I was done. Okay, good morning, everybody. A very interesting, actually, 500 millibar chart today. We've got a long wave trough over the complete Tasman. It covers the entire, well, almost the entire Southwest Pacific. And New Zealand is along with the Tasman, New Zealand. It just covers a completely broad area. Now, not French Polynesia, not that far, but pretty much in our part of the ocean. Now, residing in this long wave is a short wave that's just about over New Zealand, and we have a closed short wave near Tasmania. Now, a closed wave, seeing as how today we'll talk about terminology, a closed wave means that when you observe the charts, you'll see circular isoheights. So just little circles of lines, just like you would on a surface chart for a high or for a low. Now, as a reminder to you on the 500 millibar chart, that's a chart that shows the height in meters of 500 millibar. No other pressure but that, 500 millibar, period. And there are 3 digits that are typically shown on these maps. The 4th digit is a 0, and that is not shown. So if you're looking at one and you see, say 558, it means that the 500 millibar height is 5,580 meters, or about roughly 17,000 to 18,000 feet. Now, a closed pattern usually means that the surface low is directly underneath and usually has reached its maximum intensity. So that's another reason that I look at upper levels to see, well, just how long is this low going to hold together and so forth. So to continue, we've got a 500 millibar ridge to the east of New Zealand. And as a result, this is what the synoptic picture looks like this morning. So underneath that ridge is a nice little high, 1019 central pressure. Over New Zealand is a complex low pattern, and that's got multiple low pressure areas, multiple lows, if you will. That's the definition of a complex low. Anyway, there are at least 5 troughs and fronts that are pushing north from that, and we've got one right now over us. One is between Fiji and Vanuatu, and one is over Vanuatu. And we've got a cold front just about over the Loyalty, just leaving the Loyalties, and a second front behind that one, but a little bit further to the south. Now to the east of Tasmania, remember under that closed upper level low that we're talking about, upper level trough, there is a 997 surface low, and that also has a number of troughs and fronts that are pushing up the Queensland coast and the western Tasman, getting almost up to Norfolk Island on one of them. Now, let's look at the current conditions up in the tropics where you are. The trough, the prefrontal trough, if you will, has arrived over Vanuatu. We could see it on imagery, with cold front just about caught up with it. Now, the trough runs from 25 south right up through Vanuatu and goes on to the Solomons. Now there's another trough that lies over Tuvalu, and there's yet another one over Tokelau. And what else? The high under that 500 ridge is fairly weak. Like I said, it was about 1019 millibar. It lies south of Niue. The center of it is near 25 south and 170 west. What a lot of times happens, I'll just divert for a second. When you have a cold front that is approaching the islands, very typically, if you look at a map, say you look at a Fiji map, they like to show troughs once the cold front gets up into the tropics. And again, I'm going to talk about the differences, but usually what happens is the cold front is goes all the way up to what we consider to be the tropics, which is about 23 to 22 and a half south. That's sort of the line where you have the tropics to the north and the subtropics to the south. And then from there, that cold front turns into a trough. I'll put that turns into a little quote marks there. And again, we'll talk about why they do that sort of thing in a minute. But first, we'll do the weather up in the islands. And looking at Tonga this morning on the loop, the satellite loop, we've got cloud that's swirling around Vavau and the Papayas, leaving Tonga Tapu pretty much in the clear. This is the western edge of all these cloud clusters. So the worst of the cloud is to the east, closer to Niue, or in between Vavau and Niue. Now this cluster is the remains of the trough that was over the country. So there may be still some cloudy periods today and scattered showers. Conditions early this morning, Vavau was cloudy, northeast 6 to 10 knots. The Papayas were cloudy, east of 10, and the barometer was about 10-15 for both areas. And winds today expect fairly light. Later into Wednesday, expect northeasterlies about 10 to 15 as the flow starts to back, and when it does that, that's the clue that it's starting to feed a trough that's nearby, and that would be the trough that would be approaching Fiji. Now, Fiji itself shows scattered cloud on imagery, but plenty of fine breaks there, so it sounds like it'll be fairly nice. The frontal band is not too far away, just to the west. So as a result, winds are backing to the north to northeast, and they'll be about 10 to 15 knots. Looking at radar this morning, it indicates a few showers north of Vanuatu, but no returns for the rest of the country, so it looks pretty good. I would expect the frontal band to affect Fiji sometime tomorrow. It may be weakened considerably, may not, but looks like it may be. Winds are going to shift to become southeasterlies once it starts to roll through, around 15 knots. But don't forget the gusts. You'll have certainly higher gusts when this goes through. Vanuatu is under the trough / cold front, which starts to dissipate on Wednesday, tomorrow. But then it's going to reestablish itself on Thursday. So Vanuatu is not totally out of the woods. This is a bit of an unusual occurrence. And what's going to happen, I think, is after the first one goes through, the winds are going to trend easterly, and they're going to clash with southeasterly winds. And that is what's going to cause the upflow and the next little trough that sits there. But by Friday, all of that seems to dissipate. The winds today are going to be mostly southerly quadrant. They'll be in the 20 knot area, in that range. So a fair amount of wind in this system, and again, higher in the gusts. Over to Newcastle, imagery shows just scattered cloud. It looks pretty good. The main events have passed Grande Terre and the Loyalties, looking at the loop. Winds behind the system are southerly quadrant, about 15, getting up to 15 to 20. During the day, they should ease considerably to maybe about 10 knots by evening, dinner time or after. Tomorrow, expect south-southeast around 10 knots and partly cloudy there, partly cloudy conditions tomorrow. So that's pretty much the weather. as I see it. And what I'm going to do now is we're going to get into some of this terminology. And again, if anybody is interested in continuing to learn a little bit more about it, I wrote this paper, Weather for the Yachtsman, quite a few years ago, actually. In fact, I think I wrote it about 2008. But anyway, it covers more than just terminology. It gets into grid files and all sorts of interesting things. And then it also offers some rules of thumb that I put together that you could use when you're in the tropics or subtropics. But anyhow, we'll get to what we started to talk about here, and that is the difference between a trough and a front. So a trough, this is technically what a trough is. It's an elongated area of low pressure. Elongated area of low pressure. So why they don't use it in Scandinavian countries, I don't know. It's a well-recognized meteorological term. We all use it, and that's basically the technical definition of it. And that trough is usually found between two highs. And I think you can see why that would be. You've got flow from the eastern high that's more or less from a northerly quadrant, and the western high that flows from a southerly quadrant. And usually these wind flows have different temperatures and certainly different speeds, and they clash. And so that is what causes the trough. But they also could be found in a depression or a low, or even in a ridge of high pressure within the ridge itself. Now, if you draw a line down the center of a trough, if you just do this, if you get a chart and just do that little exercise, you'll surprise yourself and see that the pressure on either side of that line is going to be higher. Thus, the wind wants to flow downhill, if you will, and that goes to the trough axis. Now, when that happens, the air converges and it rises. Doesn't have any other choice, does it? It rises and that forms the cloud and the rain. Now, in practice, the word trough is used when there is no temperature differential on either side of that center line. So I'll say that again, no temperature differentiation. Now, this is the main difference between a trough and a front. In practice, the use of the word front means there is a definite temperature discontinuity across it. Technically, a front is defined as the interface between two air masses of different density. And when I say density, I mean temperature and or moisture. Moisture plays a part in this as well. Both of these, a front and a trough, will have a wind shift across the axis. So that's the difference between the two. So what will form a trough? So apart from the simple example of a trough between the two highs, a trough can certainly develop when there is upper air forcing, and the most common cause of a trough in the subtropics is the jet stream, even in the tropics for that matter. In a jet stream, we often find a jet max. I talk about that all the time. And within that jet stream, this jet max, it's an oval area, very high wind. And if you pull down those charts, you'll be able to see it quite readily. And those interested, I can give you the internet address that I use, that if you want to take a look yourself. The jet max creates an upward motion, and that's felt on the surface. Thus, the surface pressure falls, and when it falls, it creates the trough. Now, sometimes in a ridge that's extending into the tropics, we'll see a forward dip. I've talked about that many times, and that's otherwise known as an inverted trough in the isobars. Now, that means the isobars turn south or polar, and then they curve back northward or equatorward, and that creates what we call the dip, and then they continue on their anticyclonic rotation. Now, in this dip, this is a warning. The dip has the potential to develop into a low or a trough. Again, it's usually a jet max that initiates this. Now, alternatively, we can have an extension of an upper level trough heading up toward the equator that could act like a jet max by also causing surface pressure to drop. And that will create a surface trough. And that happens on the east side of the axis of an upper level trough. And that's why I tend to talk about not only the trough, but where the axis is as well. Now, the second sort of trough that we see up in the tropics is when we see a stationary front up there, and that's very, very common. That stationary front up in the tropics lies more or less east-west. Now, at the beginning, there is a temperature difference across the front. Let me back up a little bit. Typically, the front comes from, say, the New Zealand area, as an example. But after a while, a period of time, that front becomes disassociated with the parent low. In other words, it gets cut off. The low carries on, but that front still stays there. And then, after a time of wonder, it starts to rotate a little bit, so it lies east-west, and that's where these things come from. And when it does that, we call it a quasi-stationary front. And by quasi-stationary, that means that it moves no more than about 5 knots. So quasi-stationary, very slow, 5 knots. Now, originally there was a temperature or a density discontinuity, usually a temperature difference, but you can picture this, I think, as it lies east-west, that temperature difference is going to go away. So those temperatures now become a little bit more uniform. And when they do that, then it's no longer a front, is it? So we'll call it a trough at that point. And, well, lastly, a trough can develop in the cold air behind a cold front in the subtropics. So when you're sailing back to New Zealand and you're picking up the front in the ribs, but all of a sudden you're looking at your barometer, you see the normal backing of the wind first, then you look at the barometer a little bit and something strange there, but then you also are seeing that the wind, instead of continuing to back, starts to veer just a little bit. So backing means it's going counterclockwise, veering means it's going clockwise. So it starts to veer just a little bit. Now this is a prelude to a secondary trough, and when it passes, the wind is going to back again. And unfortunately, there could be multiple troughs behind the original cold front, and these take people by surprise very, very often. You think, oh, the front's gone by, everything's hunky-dory, up go the sails and all that sort of thing, and then boom, all of a sudden we've got a trough. And then, whoops, there may be another one behind that. That's pretty much it, and I explain it a little bit more in this paper if you want to follow through a bit more. But you probably wonder, how do we find out what's going on? How do we know that there is a trough or a cold front in the Southwest Pacific? And this is done through two things. One, we look at satellite imagery. It's incredibly important to do that because you can very easily see the bands of cloud, organized bands of cloud. We also look at the QuickSat type satellites that give actual wind direction, so we could see differences in wind on either side of the cloud bands. And the other thing that we look at is another chart, actually two charts. So you could take your pick. You could look at one called theta W and one called theta E. And I'm not going to get into these. They're quite technical. They have to do with the density of the air as you go up in altitude. But what the chart looks like may be of interest. These theta W or theta E charts are a series of lines that go across the synoptic map. So you can see New Zealand, New Caledonia, Australia on this chart. And you're looking at these lines. Well, where you see a concentration of lines, where they start to come together to make sort of a fat line, that is where the trough or the front is. So putting all those things together, you can pretty much establish what you have, whether it's a front or simply a trough. Now these satellites are also picking up temperature, remember. So when Met Service puts a trough down, they're picking up temperatures probably from the satellites that are passing over. So somebody will say, oh, I don't see much of a temperature differential behind this, so I'm going to draw a trough. And another one will say, I see one, I'm going to put in a cold front. So that's pretty much it. So hopefully that little bit of education there will make sense of what we talk about every day. As far as you're concerned, you probably don't care what it is. If you're getting wet and it's windy, that's probably all you care about. But for those that do have an interest in weather, that's the deal. So with that, I'll pass it over to the chief, or Leadfoot. I'm going to call you Leadfoot from now on. So we'll go from there.
Well, that was pretty extensive, and as mentioned before, if you want to really get into study it, then you can go to the website ghradio.co.nz or email ghradio@extra.co.nz. He's happy to talk about weather at any time, so don't worry about that. So I think the major difference is, well, you get a wind change with a front, whereas you don't with a trough. So it is quite important to know the difference between the two. Have I got that right?
You can get a wind change. You can get a wind change with either one, but the temperatures is the main difference.
Yeah, well, that doesn't really matter when it's warm anyway. So it would matter to us when we've only got 13 degrees at the moment. All right, is there anybody with any questions? And we forgot to ask you if there was any questions about weather wherever you happen to be. I know there's a few people moving around. I know Chara, and they've had good weather to get from Savu to Wallace or Fortuna. Can't remember which. Wallace, I think, and back again. But if there's any questions, please come now. Oh, Gracious Lady, and you, just to remind David, but I know he knows, Gracious Lady are wanting to leave Port Vila to go to Oz. It's actually quite early to go to Oz, but he'll just have a quick look. Have you got a specific question, Hillary? Go ahead, over.
I don't know if you're still talking or not.
No, carry on.
Well, I hope I'm not doubling, but anyway, looking at the Sunday time frame, not good between New Caledonia and Queensland. There is going to be the development of a trough, and your winds are going to be probably northeast fashion up in the 20 knot range once you clear or pass New Caledonia, southeast on the other side of the trough, but there's going to be some nasty weather right in that trough. So I don't know where you'll be by then. That's going to be Sunday, this coming Sunday. That looks like this is going to happen. So anyhow, if you can hear us, that's what it looks like. So not sure what your plan is. You may want to drop an email. That'd be better since we can't hear you. Over.
I'll just see if there's anyone in New Caledonia that can copy you. I'd be interested to know what you're going to do. Malua, are you there, Harry?
Yes, I came in a bit late, but I am still here. I heard Gracious Lady. They were very short. Gracious Lady, do you have anything? Come now.
I don't hear you now.
Nothing heard from Gracious Lady, Patricia.
Okay, he probably heard what David said. So what are you going to be doing? Are you still thinking of leaving this week? Over?
I've changed my plans. I'm heading next week if what David said disappears by Sunday.
Well, you're a true cruiser. 1 minute he's going to Kos and the next minute he's going to Fiji. I think that's what I'd do too, looking at the satellite picture. Alrighty, well, keep in touch on that one. So wait till this mess goes through and see what happens. All right, that's good. And I don't know if Bravo is still there. I'd be interested to know what you're going to do at the end of the season too. I forgot to ask you yesterday. All right, is there anybody else? I was too busy coughing to be able to see who that was. Oh, that's Chara, I think. Go ahead. Oh, I'm not copying you too well. Could anybody work out what that was?
This is Mo. Go ahead with your position report.
Thank you for that, Harry. Actually, I got most of that, except I got 151541. So, yep, they're doing the usual run from Fiji and back again. So, yep, looks rather nice for them. So, good sailing to you guys. All right, is there anybody else? All right, we'll leave you in peace, and you can leave us with our snotty weather, and we will be back again tomorrow morning. So have a good day, everybody. The frequency 8752 is all yours as Gulf Harbour Radio is now clear.